Davis Masten is a mediaX Distinguished Visiting Scholar, and with a significant history in helping companies and brands, especially in Silicon Valley, but around the world, create their identity and their marketing strategy. He has taken those interests to the President's Council of the National Academies of Science in helping them think through how science stories can be told to engage the public in supporting the kinds of budget that's necessary to continue developing insights that will translate into economic wealth for the country. But he has also been involved in helping storytellers get access to experts and scientists in order to make sure that their stories are factual. So Davis has some perspectives from the business world that he's going to share with us today.
Great. Thank you, Martha. It's a pleasure, a privilege to be back with mediaX giving a talk. And this talk was originally done at the National Academy of Sciences last September for the Sackler Colloquia on the science of science communication. And I co-presented with Peter Zanden. You can see his name up here. I'll get into Peter in a second. But it was a very personal moment for me, because it was less than a year before that. I was about 200 feet away in a different auditorium at the NAS. And I was at the third day of a conference, and I thought I had the flu, and I asked for somebody to help me get a plane ride home early. And so when I thought that somebody was calling me to say the car was here to take me out to my earlier flight at Dulles, no, it was that person, but with security, with a wheelchair. And they wheeled me down over my protestations, because I'm a road warrior, I'm just on the road, I don't feel good, I just want to go home. I ended up, they wheeled me down to an ambulance. 4 hours later, at Georgetown University Hospital, they read me last rites. I'm here, I'm happy, I'm healthy, all of that. But I start with that because prior to that time, when we'd sold our company, when my partners and I had sold our company, Cheskin, in 2007, we sold it to WPP, big communications conglomerate, that I had a lot of flexibility on what to do. And I found myself doing a lot of work with the president of the National Academy of Sciences, president of the National Academy of Engineering, Institute of Medicine, and the like, as a way to do service and give back. Because I thought that while many things are important in life, scaling science and technology to meet the needs for mankind, it was a unique opportunity that I'd had. Well, I've now been in that co-chair position for 5 years, and I take this pretty seriously. But given that it was science that saved my life, that 10 years before, that science didn't exist, I would be gone. So I get that there's some urgency, and in that context that I don't have a lot to offer science other than from a communication standpoint. Maybe there's some lessons from business that the science community can think about. So Peter, who is the vice chairman of Hill & Knowlton, they're in over 50 countries, and they do communications. He's arguably the most successful, or one of the most successful market research entrepreneurs in the last 20 or 30 years. The two of us are members of the President's Circle, and so when asked, we were happy to give this talk. So in my work, when I was at Procter & Gamble, they were a client for 5 years. I was working at the top 20 brands around the world. They said, Davis, when you give a talk here, tell people what you're going to try to convince them of right off. And then they'll fact check as they go along, but don't hold out to the end. So I'm starting with this, and I'm going to finish with this, and you can take it as you may. There's some observations. We're using the word outshined, that science communicators are being outshined, outmaneuvered, out a lot of things. Politically, I didn't want to say outgunned because that just seemed wrong. But that outshined, there's reason that we see, and I think you may find that you find reason that science communication needs to change. And is there hope? We think so, but I'll leave that for you to decide. We'll offer up a framework, that there are metrics, new metrics that need to be created by scientists. That's where all these metrics tend to come from anyway. And these are about engagement. Although just having heard your talk, I will be thinking more dynamically. But in a sense, we're getting at the same kind of issues. And in business, there's ROI, return on investment. And return on investment is oftentimes how communications is justified. In the science world, I'm not convinced that ROI is the right measure. I don't know what the right measure. Neither Peter or I know what the right measure is. But in that context, it needs that measure, that the powers that be, when they're justifying new machinery on a university or at a national labs or wherever, that they need to be able to say, well, gosh, do I spend it here or do I spend it on this communications stuff? And so without that formula, we're not sure that real progress is going to be made. So let's get into it. The active ingredient is marketing, is what the caption says on this little ad. Science has good reason to be skeptical. We're all skeptical of salespeople. We're all skeptical of marketing types. We know people are very sophisticated nowadays in terms of when and how they're being sold to. But in the context of, I'll give you an experience that Peter shared. So the National Academies, for I think most of you know, chartered by Congress to signed by Abraham Lincoln to give third-party advice to Congress, the White House, federal agencies, and the like. So Peter is sitting in, along with 90-some-odd scientists, the best America has to offer, on the climate, on America's climate choices. Well, America's climate choices is the U.S. Congress said, what's going on here? So they finally get to the point where they've done the science, or well enough along where they know what the story is going to be, and that when Peter is asked, well, how can we communicate about this? A whole group of scientists got up and walked out of the room and made it very clear that we don't want to communicate about this. This is going to go to Congress. The staff people are going to read it, and that's good enough. Because we don't want to be tainted. If we worry about communications, our work is going to be called into question. Well, so as a communications guy, Peter lived these kinds of things firsthand. Obviously, there are a lot of great science communicators, but culturally, science has some things to address. I think metaphorically, we chose this freight train. If you think of the freight train as each car is a different discipline, and it's about the utility. This is not Tesla doing sexy stuff. It's about the facts. It's about truth. It's about when we're just coming at you and we're going and we're going and we're going. And that's great. However, from a communication standpoint, it's just one of these things that happens in the night. And when things go wrong, there's not going to be a lot of understanding. And part of what's hard about science, as I've become more of a student about it, is that science tends to piss off everybody. Right? It is the data that we're all trapped by the data of the moments in which we live there. So it's truth, but it's just the data that's collected. And if you don't like guns, you don't want to learn about gun research. If you're convinced on the climate stuff that man has nothing to do with it, you're not going to pay any attention to the science. We can take the academies has boards that study with many times. It's people at Stanford with the likes of John Hennessy donating their time to do these things. But there are 100 different boards. The subjects, the opportunities to challenge people's beliefs are tremendous. So the freight train, we think, is not necessarily the most appropriate metaphor, but when you don't care about it and you don't trust it, just the facts is a possibility. So let's talk about what we think is a serious concern here. So a little bit of data. So communication spending, and this is a couple of years ago, was over $1 trillion. This is just broken down by mass advertising versus targeted media. But and as we looked at the data, there were estimates of $1.2 trillion, $1.6 trillion. The numbers here are not that important. It's the relationships. What's important here is that science communication outside of education was less than $1 billion. Okay, let's say we got it wrong. It's $2 billion. That's really a stretch, but we could say that it's 3. The noise that is collected at over $1 trillion. This is the market research. The American Marketing Association in 2012 said that there was between $9.5 and $10 billion spent doing market research to better understand markets, to better understand audiences. Well, that's spending more money 3 times, 5 times, 10 times, pick your numbers. It's way out of proportion that the people who are the professional communicators, who are incentivized with an ROI, with bonuses, that people just want to get better and better, that they're spending somewhere between 3 to 10 times as much just measuring what they're doing to get better. So this is not the healthiest state of affairs to think that science communicators are really going to be up to the challenge. Part of what's so odd is that most of the techniques that industry uses were invented in academia. But there's plenty of money to apply it in industry because it's in pursuit of ROI. Whereas the NSF may dole out a little money here. It's people in industry, if it chases, if it looks like it creates results, they'll just throw lots and lots of money at it because that's part of what drives their ROI. We're suggesting that, let me ask, how many people, do you remember just after President Obama got elected the first time, there was this magazine cover in the New York Times magazine? So Martha does. This was, they said, is selling a president any different from selling a pizza? The Obama campaign's digital masterminds cash in. We wonder, is selling science any different than selling a pizza? Obviously, there are integrity issues. Obviously, there are privacy issues. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't fit into the pizza analogy. However, they're taking more care selling pizza and communicating about it than science generally is communicating about itself. Now, it's not to say that all hope is lost. There are institutional advantages that science has, and these are just a few of them. So 17.5 million people attend colleges and universities, and every ninth grader, I'm not an expert at this, but my impression is that every ninth grader still has to go through a science course and the like. So there's lots of opportunity there. Museums, 850 million visits to U.S. Museums alone. And generally, these statistics come from a lot of different places, but this is just NASA saying 74% of Americans agree that scientists work for the good of humanity. So there's a positive rub that comes with this. And that as we start to look at efficient and effective ways to spend money, social media is a place where you obviously get the feedback on engagement. But there are other kinds of places where you can get feedback on engagement. For instance, everybody just walks around with these things, right? So it's a smartphone. This has somewhere between 4 and 6 sensors in it. The Qualcomm, who makes the chips for these things, Their engineering roadmap says that they're going to be, in a few years, 14 to 17 sensors in these things. The average city has 1 billion sensors in it now. By 2020, it will have 10 billion sensors in it. mediaX co-sponsored the Trillion Sensor Summit last fall. So, I mean, the numbers are huge. But the ability for someone, with this thing walking around with you, with lots of sensors built in, getting a sense of who you are and what's important to you. It gives an opportunity to speak to you in a different way, engage you in a different way. And when you get off to edgier things like the quantified self, how many people have heard of the quantified self? Okay, well, great. So it more than, maybe 2/3 or 3/4. So these are people who track something about themselves. 70% of Americans track something. It may be their weight. I know in my case, I've lost at least 1 million pounds. But that it may be the weight, it may be their heartbeats, it may be all kinds of things. There are actually, within the QS community worldwide, there are thousands of things being tracked. And there's lots of innovation. Again, there are privacy problems, there are all kinds of things, but it is about helping the world become more relevant and have you be engaged. So I'm looking at the clock and say, well, let me just try to give a couple of examples, and then I'll be done. That Ralph Cicerone, president of the NAS, says scientists have great stories to tell and many important people want to hear them, so let's get going and tell them. So a couple of things. We can do that in the traditional way. And there have been communication pioneers. Jane Goodall, I was thrilled when my daughter met her, years ago. It was just like a real celebrity. Neil deGrasse Tyson. He was one of the scientists. He's an astrophysicist, does the Hayden Planetarium in New York, and NOVA on PBS. But that Neil he came to the opening of the Science and Entertainment Exchange in Hollywood. So this is the National Academy of Sciences. The kickoff day was in Century City. It was emceed by Seth MacFarlane. Seth MacFarlane emceed the Oscars last year. He's the highest paid writer in Hollywood. And the two of them just kicking it around in kind of accidental ways came up with the idea to buy Carl Sagan's library, which Seth bought and donated to the Library of Congress, and that in early March, Fox, of all people, not PBS, but Fox is going to have 12 new episodes of Cosmos with Neil as the speaker, with Seth as the writer, and Fox put up the money with absolutely no creative control whatsoever, and they're airing it on primetime. Right? That gives an example of what kinds of different things can happen if we think differently about it. And from that standpoint, if we start to take stories broadcast in that way, yet we start to bring those stories into not only what your personal social media patterns are, but what raises your blood pressure or what your health might be, or there's so many different ways to look at this, and it's going to be scientists who are going to figure this out, is my sense. The control, to a large degree, is that almost all this stuff is new, and it's going to be the scientists who are going to analyze it. It's going to be the scientists who can continue to give up control on the conversation, or if they can own the conversation, then to my mind, more people like me will be saved around the world as science makes more breakthroughs, and the opportunities for science to contribute to people on their smartphones or really to have their lives saved. That's really the opportunity at hand. So I'm all for science communication, and I'm happy to talk to people as we go through. So key points: being outspent. There is need for change. It's hope, but man, it's an uphill battle. We need metrics. We need engagement. And if anybody has any idea what we ought to have for ROI that fits within the integrity of science. It's I think for a higher pay grade than me. But I'm totally open to it because I think that is going to be what drives the communication revolution in science, and I think it's up to us to do it. Thank you.